Zoran's with us here on the set, and we're also joined by Chris Kobrak. He's Professor of Finance at the ESCP Business School here in Paris. Thanks very much for coming in. Gentlemen, I hope you're both strapped in. I think we're in for a bit of a rocky ride on the markets. That downgrade, of course, by Moodys of Société Générale and of Crédit Agricole as well.
We did say on Monday, didn't we? It could be a long week, and so it's proving, Stuart. Let's give you the numbers first of all before we get into the details of that downgrading by Moodys of Société Générale and Crédit Agricole. The European markets, as you'd probably expect, opening in the red once again this Wednesday morning, and it's the CAC 40 here in Paris and the DAX in Frankfurt leading that charge downward, both opening well over 1% down. The FTSE in London perhaps less affected right now, certainly in the immediate aftermath of this, opening just 0.4% down. Those French banks concerned, Crédit Agricole and indeed Société Générale, their share price has gone down again this morning, as you'd probably expect, around 5% down. BNP Paribas as well hasn't escaped this, although it did escape the downgrade from Moody's. It has been put on credit watch for review, though. The Asian markets, again, not a great day's trade. The Nikkei ending the day around 1% down. That was largely off the back of comments from the Chinese Prime Minister keeping the brakes or keeping things in check with the growth of the Chinese economy. Just to give you some numbers on this downgrade, Stuart and Chris, by Moody's. The main points on that: Crédit Agricole's rating cut from AA1 to AA2, Société Générale cut from AA2 to AA3. So both of them downgraded by one notch. Just to take some numbers from Moody's statement, a very detailed statement from that company, talking on the positives that Société Générale has sufficient levels of capital to absorb the losses on any write-down on Greek bonds, but noting that it has a combined exposure to Spain and Italy of over 7 billion euros. What interested me particularly, and we can pick up on this, is that they set out a scenario in which Société Générale had to take write-downs on pretty much every distressed economy in Europe. If that happened, according to Moody's, Société Générale would lose around 1.6 billion euros in total. That's around 3% of its Tier Core 1 capital. Chris, let me bowl this over to you, just hearing that. This downgrade, of course, we expected it over the weekend. We knew it was going to happen. What do you take from that?
Just a little perspective on it. And I think lots of people are running very, very nervous after 2008, after all the mistakes that were made. And they don't want to be caught out. They don't want to be holding the hot potato. And if something goes wrong, it's much worse for them if something goes wrong and they haven't said anything, to be overcautious. Overcautious is the easier thing to do.
Has the market overreacted, though? We've had Société Générale saying for the past couple of days now, we can survive this Greek crisis, we can survive this Eurozone crisis. The markets aren't buying it. Have the markets overreacted?
The markets also overreact. The markets are also antsy. The markets are also living in the shadow of 2008. But I don't know. There are too many unknowns. The dirty problem that we left after 2008, I don't think has been sufficiently addressed, is that we've allowed the banking system to have too many complex transactions that no one knows for sure how they're going to work out. And there are a lot of things that we're going through that are kind of completely new for us. So we don't know with these instruments how they will be affected, how markets will react to very, very new circumstances. And after 2008, which was a pretty ugly experience, people will tend to assume the worst. Now, there are positive things out there. Governments have put in place deposit protection. No depositor in France has to worry. There are some easy ways to solve some of the short-term problems of the banks that have by providing more liquidity. Something that people don't talk about often enough is the fact that the TARP money, the $800 billion that the United States provided, virtually all of it has been repaid. So there are things that can be done in that regard, and hopefully governments have learned a little bit since 2008. So, but that doesn't mean we're not going to see a lot of panic.
We can but hope. In fact, we've just got this in. The governor of the Bank of France has already reacted to all this. Let's listen to what he had to say.
This may surprise you, but I see this as relatively good news. That's because everyone was expecting a downgrade by Moody's. It's relatively good news, firstly, because it's a very limited downgrade affecting 2 out of 3 banks, and especially because Moody's grades better than the other 2 agencies, so in reality it is now rating them at the same level or slightly better than them.
So there you go, he said it. Relatively good news. Do you think the doom-mongers are totally wrong then?
Well, there's another thing too. The expression, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. And the truth is, if the markets see that when survives all of this, and then the banks are reacting by showing what position they're in, really, the central banks are saying, look, we can handle this. This is not a difficult problem. And we survive it, we become a little stronger because of it. And that's a useful lesson too.
Let me just interrupt. There's one other question that I really want to ask. In 10 seconds, if you are an ordinary punter on the street, you know nothing about business, and you've got money in one of these banks, should you be worried? 10 seconds.
If you have money in the bank,
yeah.
No. If you have money, you have cash in your deposit, no, not at all. Whether you should be buying stock or not, that's completely different. But
that's different.
Yes.
All right, good. Well, Chris, we're going to pick up on the Eurozone story with you in a moment, because there's plenty more to come out today, namely in France and Germany, teleconferencing about Greece. Latest talks aimed at preventing the Eurozone's most indebted country from going bankrupt. That could be just weeks away if its latest emergency credit line isn't forthcoming. Let's hear from Nicholas Rushworth now.
These taxi drivers are heading for Parliament. It is the latest anti-austerity protest in Athens. They are suffering from the liberalisation of the taxi sector.
It's not opening up our profession at all. It's a disaster for us generally. That's why we're here. This is a final effort to change something that's affecting our jobs.
The anger is being fueled by a blanket 2-year property tax imposed over the weekend, brought in to plug a €2 billion budget hole to stave off default. But such a measure also exposes government foot-dragging. The markets don't like that. Interest rates on 10-year Greek government bonds have risen above 24%. That's 10% up on early August. The country's colossal debt-to-GDP ratio isn't being reined in fast enough. The economy is expected to shrink 5% this year, adding to the 4% slide last year. Unemployment remains high. Greece's financial woes are critical, even though it has been allocated 2 international bailouts worth around €110 billion each.
So that's the situation in Greece as things stand. The leaders of France and Germany speaking to their Greek counterpart today. Chris, just to finish on all of this, we've seen in the last few days China suddenly becoming increasingly important to this discussion. Reports that China is in discussion with the Italian government about buying their debt. We know they're already buying Greek debt. They've bought Greek ports, showing similar support for Portugal. Is China now becoming the main creditor to Europe?
I think it has been an important creditor, and it's going to increase its involvement. Whether that's bad, I don't see that as a danger. I think that's going to increase China's interest in what's going on in Europe and in the United States. But there's an old joke, and the joke is if you owe someone $100, that's your problem. If you owe someone $100 million, that's their problem. And the Chinese recognize that the more they get on the hook, they have a problem to see that everything goes well here, and that's a commonality of interest that I think we all will share.